Welcome back to session 5 of our 6-part series. Amazing for those of us that have been through the 4 parts and we're already at session 5 instead of still stuck somewhere in session 1 going, what are we going to do with all this? We have obviously covered a lot of ground, and I'm happy for the people that have been here live with us to interact and make the series an interactive and an exciting thing for us, and in some ways transformative already in terms of making us better at what we do. I've also heard some great feedback from a couple of people who have been on the archive version, so grateful for the feedback. Glad that's working. And again, we will consider you part of the audience that we're working with here, part of our co-conspirators in learning. Session 5, as we prepare for the all-important final session where it will primarily be people doing practice presentations and being critiqued. Since we're preparing for that today, most of our work today is going to be focusing on last-minute things that you want to think about in terms of preparing for delivery, actually doing delivery, some of the issues we face, and then finally going back to that theme that I think we covered in session 2 about evaluating for success so that we can start the whole process over again and know how to build off of our successes. So basically our word today that is guiding us is the word challenges, and as we'll be focusing on. With that in mind, instead of telling my own story to start off the session today that is a challenge story, I'm going to pick up something that one of our asynchronous participants sent me by email last week. So here's a story from her with a question that we're going to dive into a little bit ourselves. For those of you watching the archive version, at some point when we get into discussion, freeze this, think through what you're hearing in terms of the challenge, and think through some of the solutions you might come up with. Because my response to her was twofold. One is that is a great story and a great challenge for us to face. It hits so many of us that are in the training world. And the second thing is, rather than my just going out and saying, here's my answers, I wanted to go to the wisdom of our crowd. And this morning on the live version, of course, the crowd is rather smallish, but still dynamic and good enough that I think we're going to have something come out of this. So without further ado, and again, acknowledging that for those of you that think you always have to keep your eye on the camera and you can never break away from making eye contact, remember, if we're in a live space face-to-face, there are times when we look down and we read notes because the notes are better than just speaking off the top of our head. And there's no reason why we can't do that. So as much as possible, and I'm just taking you under the hood again, as much as possible, I'm going to do exactly what I would do face-to-face. I'll read, but take my eyes off the text at moments to establish eye contact. That's a technique I'm pointing out to you so that you're aware of it and you can work on it too. So here from one of our co-conspirators is the story. Recently, I've been having some difficulty when it comes to training men, more specifically men older than me, as well as some women older than me. I've been thinking about the topic of blending, and it occurred to me that maybe there's a way to blend yourself as a trainer rather than just the topic to become more accessible to those that you're trying to train. So my question is, do you have any advice for those instances when you are training people older than you are? Again, here's the central question. Do you have any advice for those instances when you're training somebody older than you are? She says, I've flit around this line of not wanting to be aggressive or unnecessarily confrontational, and also not wanting to diminish myself because someone is uncomfortable with my age or believes that their experience outweighs my own. I realize this is complex, but I would be very grateful for any insight you have. So our opening story is right there. What do we do when we're working with people that have something noticeably different than we are? And they are using that to sort of put us at a disadvantage as their training facilitators, whether they're older, whether they're of a different ethnic background, whether there are linguistic barriers in there. But let's focus on that really difficult one right here. A woman potentially in a room primarily with men, but she's acknowledging that there are women involved. They're older than she is, and they're sort of making her feel as if they don't think that she's qualified to be there, and they're undercutting her by their actions and their words. How do we deal with that?
I kind of think about that from a touch points in libraries perspective. So touch points is a training that we go through to work with families and children from diverse cultural backgrounds. And they have a few different guiding principles and a few different assumptions that you make as you're coming into an interaction with a family. So one of the things that you really have to reflect on is knowing what you bring to the interaction. So I guess just really knowing who your audience is, and then knowing who you are as a presenter and just being really authentic about that. Just acknowledging up front, like, I understand that I appear to be younger. I appear to be new to this field. I don't have the same experience, but the experience that I do have is something that I want to bring to this training and impart to you so that we can learn together. So making it more of a learning partnership, recognizing that you're going to be taking something from their knowledge base, but there's also something that you can impart to them. So I think maybe approaching it as more of a partnership in learning rather than you being the expert and them being the, you know, the learners. I don't know if that makes sense.
That is a great starting point for us. So let's just tie this back into content of this course. What is the word we keep using for each other as partners in this particular course?
Co-conspirator.
Exactly, co-conspirators. And again, I've adapted that from people that I've learned from because I just think it covers so much that you talked about, Laura. It's playful, it's inviting. It makes you think a little bit because most learners who are hearing it for the first time really have to struggle with it. I'm going to take this back to a religious setting, which of course we're never supposed to do in a training thing, but there are certain things in services that I've gone to where if you go to the same congregation in the same religion week after week, things are done so routinely that we get into rote recitation. And if anything changes that ceremony, it brings it to life in a way that makes us think again. And if we can do that in our learning, instead of everybody coming in and thinking, all right, we're going to show 25 slides and we're going to have 2 discussions. And at the end of it, there's always going to be this one question. If we break out of that and change things up for people, it helps. Going back to the situation that we're addressing here, though, about the idea of people being older than us or different from us, those points of knowing your audience or anticipating your audience a little bit is good. Whether you bring in positive or negative assumptions about them, it's good. Laura, what's one of the things you've done to get to know your audience before you step into the classroom?
I'm a really big fan of icebreakers. So just little activities that get you asking questions. People bingo is one of my favorite things to do. And I work a lot more with kids, so kind of that's a different audience to work with. But just giving them a list of different characteristics or different things that you've experienced and saying, go around the room, meet different people, find out who has, you know, something similar, find out who's traveled to Europe 15 times in their life or who speaks another language. So just making sure that you're hitting all of those different experience perspectives that people are bringing to the table when they come to a training.
With that main point about it, if you're going around the room and those exercises are happening and those stories are being told, and you suspect that somebody who's older than you might be looking at you askance because you've already noticed from their body language that they're kind of sitting like this. You think, well, that person isn't quite in tune with me yet. What's something that can come out of that icebreaker you just described that can start breaking down this into this?
Well, they get to share something that they love about themselves, which I feel like people love talking about things they love to do or experiences that they've had that they're proud of. So I think that that's kind of a barrier breaker. And then, you know, if you find something in common, like say you have this, you share the same favorite sports team, then you immediately have something that you can connect with through the examples that you're giving in a course or in a training to really draw them further into what you're talking about.
And there's the bingo moment. It's like, I like that too.
Yeah.
You know, if you do the I like that too enough without it just being an obvious cloying thing that makes them think that you're taking advantage of them or trying to manipulate them, I think that does take you from this to maybe this to maybe this to this. And then you've got them. So wonderful exercise. Victor, anything you want to add to what Laura just said?
Well, definitely, like she said, you need to know your audience. You need to definitely know your audience before you even what you're preparing for it. Also, get in touch with your person you're presenting this training on, just to find out whether or not anything changed. Because there might be a chance that you will have to switch things around a little. But in my personal case, like I said, most of the times those are things that I do outside the library with other people. So the way sometimes I do icebreakers, but depending on who my target audience is, if it's more like parents that I need to show them what the library is about, I start out my presentations with a story. I read them a book. I read a children's book.
I've never done that here. Wait, let me get a training book and I'll read just now. Just kidding.
No. I actually am very what's the word? I've always carried children's books with me, whether it's in English and Spanish, and I do that just to put them at ease, and it does work wonderful. It works. Like I said, I just go straight out and I ask them, has anybody ever read your book? Have you guys ever shared the passion of reading a book to your children? So, well, as you guys know, I'm from Republic Library, and I just show them a book, and they say, well, and that's how I do my icebreaker sometimes, and they love it. They have some, it puts them at ease, and like you said, they go from here, go from here.
Yeah.
So,
Hold right there, because we're talking presentation tips today at a certain extent and challenges. Something that I've picked up from watching people and reading people be overt about this is, as a presenter, you will find that you engage people more if you are physically leaning forward during your presentations too. You probably noticed when I was just trying to demonstrate that thing of a person that was like that, immediately you felt a little bit cut back. It wasn't just the body language, but the distance. I'm diminished in the picture there by being a smaller part of it. But when I lean forward, it suggests excitement. It suggests engagement. So I think a lot of people who have not done a lot of work online forget that body language is just as important online as it is face-to-face. And again, to bring this full circle, you've heard me say this, I want to emphasize this whole idea of face-to-face being different than online. I think we've got to redefine what face-to-face is. When we are talking like this, and we are engaged and we can see each other, and the motion of us moving around a little bit and leaning in to indicate our interest, when we see that as viscerally as we see and feel that, then we have to acknowledge it. This is a new form of face-to-face. And it's every bit as important as if we were physically together 3, 6, 9, 12 feet away from each other in a training room. And when we come to that conclusion, that realization, it makes us more effective, and it makes a connection between what happens on site and online. So you probably notice when I really am thoughtful about the language I'm using here, I'll refer to as being face-to-face online or face-to-face on site, making that differentiation. But it still is at a very real level face-to-face. And going back to the first session when I told that story of the educational technology and media MOOC, and the first time Alec Koros was using Blackboard to give lectures, those things would be recorded live with lots of interactivity, very similar to what we do with Zoom. Of course, in the days of Blackboard, you had one face up there and you had a chat window down the side and you had the slides there. But even with that, I found in those sessions when I would go back and watch the archive recordings when I couldn't go to them live, when he would get into discussions and I was reading the chat, my hands would involuntarily fly to the keyboard to start typing a chat response. And I'd have to keep saying, no, it's not live. No, you cannot type to people that said this a week or two ago. But it was a great reminder to me and a great reminder to all of us doing train-the-trainer work or training people online as well as face-to-face, that if it is engaging, at a certain point, the technology drops off the radar and it really becomes about engagement. It becomes about those moments of transformation. So as you were talking about telling stories, Victor, I wanted to make sure that we're recognizing it doesn't matter whether it's face-to-face or online if we use the technology effectively and we give people a chance to interact with us. You were in the middle of talking about how you use those stories as icebreakers and then move on. Do you want to continue with that, or did I totally disrupt you?
You kind of leave, but no, but it's good. No, basically what like I said is I like to always carry books with me, and I can kind of see the audience as soon as you step into the room. You know who your target audience is. Sometimes they have children along with them, so it kind of helps the children stay still for a few minutes, and they also get relaxed, and that's how I jump into my presentations. Like I like to, at the middle of my presentation, stop a little bit and just talk about ask like a small Q&A. I don't like deferring all my questions to the end. Sometimes it's necessary, especially if it's like a lot to cover. But I like to just answer questions in between. Not like, hey, it's open for questions. But if I know that that is a question that needs to be answered, not just for that specific person, but for the room in general, I'll address the question.
You pop another story to mind on that. I was part of a training project for a while where I think there were 10 of us doing training is in different permutations. Sometimes we'd be alone in a session with our learners. Sometimes we would team teach. And I love those team teaching moments because I'd pick up tips from other people. And if our styles were different enough, that was an effective way also to keep people engaged. I was the one bouncing off the room, and you can imagine me just doing that because you know how I deliver here online. If I was the one that was high energy and I had a partner that was slightly lower energy or completely low energy, that was a great way to play off each other, because if I was going too fast, I would defer to him and he would kind of rein in those people who were feeling like they were getting left behind because they couldn't follow things. So that's something for us to think about also. And one thing that sticks with me is one colleague who I was once watched at the beginning set the tone for his session by saying, all right, we have a lot to cover today. And so I want everybody to stay with me. I don't want any side conversations going on in the room. We're going to have no solo hiking here. That just killed my spirit. I thought, no solo hiking? That means if somebody really wants to take a little side trip off the path and rejoin the group before we reach the peak of the mountain, in this case, the peak of the session, we've just killed their spirit. Your reactions, if you were in a classroom and somebody said to you, I want everybody paying attention to me, and I want you all following me, what would your reaction be as a learner?
I mean, that really closes me off. Kind of says like, "Ooh, what does that say about your ego as a trainer too?"
Yeah. Victor, any response? Well, how do you feel if I say, okay, Victor, you can't talk today. No solo hugging, no notes to Laura. I'm going to be watching the private chat and you can't send her any private chat notes, or I will put you in the corner and no Apple for you.
I'll go like this.
Yeah, okay. Let us just do this right now.
Yeah. So I guess that will automatically put you at a defensive mode, like, because you feel that you're not at ease to express yourself, I guess.
What does that tell us about the importance of something I've done in every one of these sessions, setting the room?
Well, like you were saying, you sit very open posture. You make sure your arms aren't crossed and you lean forward into the presentation and you make eye contact with the camera. So it mimics that face-to-face eye contact and, in-person interaction.
Victor?
I guess the same thing, and that's one of the things that I need to work on, looking at the camera more often. Yeah, no, one of the things that I've noticed is that, especially now since we're going through all our different runs of Zoom, like you can see how you pay more attention to that. You pay attention to those little things. Now, who's watching at you, who's not interested in the presentation, who's being defensive. So those are kind of little things that you picked up as you go through this course. It definitely helps you to grow more as a presenter. So.
We also encourage your learners to go on those side journeys. So like you'll say, let's follow along with that, because that's obviously of interest to people in this group. So, you'll move along in those side journeys and then we end up back, on the same path at the end of the trip, if you will. But you allow those individual passions and those individual directions to be explored further. And then, like you said, you always have that slide deck and those presenter notes to be able to refer back to get the full content experience after the session.
Yeah. So going right to the heart of it, how easy is it to lose an audience up front in an hour or 2 hour or day-long session?
Very.
And how long does it take to get people back if you do something like that?
Sometimes you don't.
Let's be optimistic. You may get some of them back, but it's going to be a real struggle. And so we just ask ourselves up front, why would I want to create that extra effort on my part as a facilitator of learning that I'm going to spend an extra hour or two trying to get people back, when if I had just taken a different approach and been a little more open at the beginning, I wouldn't have to struggle with this. Again, time is everything for us. Our learners don't have time to mess around. They don't have time to have to go through counseling because we just turned them totally off by saying no solo hiking. So we need to be conscious of that. And I think you saw this demonstrated at least once during the first couple sessions when I myself did a couple belly flops there. What's the best way to bring people back in if you realize, oh my God, I just said no solo hiking and everybody's off going, all right, well, I'm not going to hike at all. Yeah. What do you do?
I think kind of having that humility as a presenter to be like, whoa, I goofed here. Like I made a mistake. Let's let's explore this, or like, let's set this agenda together then. To go back to your learners and be like, where are you at? What do you need from this session? And just really tie them in then to the creation of the content that you're going to be presenting. I mean, obviously within a theme, but yeah.
Victor, anything to add to that?
We all make mistakes. We all make mistakes, like you said, and recognizing those mistakes in front of everyone definitely it kind of helps you to show them that you're human, you're fallible like the rest of them, and it will help you to ease up maybe the crowd a little bit. And then, like you said, if you want to take that little detour, address that, you can address it and then bring them back to the topic. Like pretty much like Laura says.
Yeah. So we see here that there's a philosophy underlying how we've approached this train the trainer session. Like it or hate it, it's pretty consistent. Like it or hate it, it gives us a framework in which we operate. So if we are co-conspirators, then we are comfortable and accepting of the idea that we are equals at a very important point. And if we made mistakes as equals, we share that mistake with others. We all learn from it and we move forward. I think some of the best moments that come out of a training are when somebody does something unexpected and it is so organic to what's going on there that you can learn from having seen the mistake and seeing how somebody recovers from it. So there's a lot of honesty in the co-conspirator approach to things. And I believe it makes us a lot better. I'm not going to say it's comfortable for everybody. There will always be people who are much more comfortable having their slides, covering their points, doing some basic exercises that get people to learn things, and knowing that when they go back into their work site, they're able to apply those and use them. Nothing wrong with that. If you can do this technique that we're using and you can free flow with it a little bit, for those people that are comfortable with it, it's going to be great. For those people that are not comfortable, hand them the slide deck. Tell them, here's the deck, here's stuff you're going to use. You have all this afterwards. Let's make this as comfortable as we can for you. But the goal is still, at the end of this, there is positive transformation. And we are taking away a pain point that led you to this particular room, whether it was your pain point of saying, I don't know this and I need to know it, or the organization's pain point of saying, let's be honest, folks, our customer service isn't where we want it, and we want everybody up to the same level. So like it or not, we'd like you in this session. We're going to make it as engaging as possible and as fun as possible. But the whole goal is let us be better as an organization. And unless you've got somebody really curmudgeonly and somebody hateful, at some level, the ice will melt. And you can't wait for everybody's ice to melt, otherwise you have no session. But you do the best to be inclusive and never let this stop you from doing this and being your best. So now one more thing, and then we'll circle back to the main issue here. We've talked a little bit about icebreakers. What is one way to make sure that an icebreaker is effective in an entire session? Kind of pitching you a low-hanging fruit, low ball here, saying, you've done your icebreaker. How do you not lose the impact of the icebreaker through the session?
I mean, you have to refer back to it.
Exactly.
What you learn from it, you have to reference throughout the entire session. It can't just be like, we're going to do a funny little activity and then never go back to that.
That's one of the many things I call trainer's disease. We do something really fun, really engaging up front, and everybody's ready for that level of playfulness. And we do 2 hours of reading laws about how to prevent sexual harassment. It's like, oh no, really? Why did you do that? We know, and we will say to anybody watching this later, that a cardinal rule here is make sure the icebreaker is an integral part of whatever you do and refer back to it in a meaningful way, not just to hammer back every 5 minutes, say, remember that icebreaker, but in ways to refer back to the actual action of what it meant in terms of the learning. Victor, anything else to say about icebreakers and how you use them effectively?
I never thought about that, but like Laura says, you're referring back to it. I think that would be the best way to go. I'm still yet to try that, but I'm definitely going to do that the next time around when I go to the presentation. I'm not reporting back to you guys.
Yeah, we'll want weekly reports from you. We're going to set up a special blog that you will all direct, because we don't want CLA having to take responsibility for that. Yeah, we will be talking.
Yeah, no, definitely. Yeah, like you said, it's just not just the icebreaker, but the level of engagement that you display at the beginning of your presentation. You need to be constant throughout. You just can't keep it for that fun activity and then become all business. because that's how you lose. That's how you lose your audience. If you don't, one thing that I think will be important for me that I'm actually picking up from you is just using that term co-conspirators, because or switch it around, maybe play with that, but try to use that main concept, that idea, because that will bring that people to the same level as you, and they will feel more engaged in those conversations. Um, and I mean, the proof of that is what you do. I mean, I've been in, I think, all of them except for one, and you manage to engage the people that you're working with, whether it's 5 or 10 or 2, but they're all engaged throughout, which is the main important thing. Because that's how you get those the people to remember the experience of the presentation or the training. They take away the positive of it. They might not be able to take everything, but they will take concepts. They will take some of the main ideas.
So in real time, for those of us that are in this session live, we've been together for about 45 minutes now. For those who are watching the recording, we've probably been recording for about 20 minutes, because a lot of what we did before the recording started was just catching up and setting our agenda for the day. How many times have you looked at your email in the time we've been together?
I don't think any. I'm just
Right. You haven't. How many phone calls did you take? How many times did you run out and look to see what was going on in the next room, because it was so much more interesting than this room?
No, I'm just taking a few so my water.
Yeah.
And that's fine. We all do our thing as much as we can to be comfortable. There's nothing that says we can't be comfortable. We do that if we were face-to-face on sites. No reason why we can't do it face-to-face online. I will tell you a very funny story that relates to that in terms of my own presentation style. You notice once we start the recording, my beverages stay off screen. I just don't want to take that risk. I'm going to inhale something and then spend the next 30 seconds coughing it out, and everybody's going, oh my God, the instructor's about to die. So I'm kind of cautious about that. I also, as you know, for sessions, I will try to dress up as a way of showing respect to the learners I'm with and show that I'm serious about it. I routinely do this. I don't think about it. I did a webinar with 4 other people one time where it was a panel discussion. And afterwards, somebody who had been a client and had made it clear that I was being brought in one time to work with them because they like to bring in different presenters all the time. So there wasn't much chance of making it a long-standing relationship from a business point of view. But we liked each other. We always stayed in touch. She happened to be in one of those sessions. And afterwards, she sent me an email saying, that was spectacular. You were really great. And you shined above everybody else. Well, that's kind of odd, because the other people on the panel were people I really liked, and I thought they were very good. So at the end of that, when I saw that email, I immediately picked up the phone and said, now, I'm not going to let a comment like that go by. Tell me why you thought I was different than the others and why it impressed you. She says, you dressed up and nobody else did. You always looked at the camera and you were attentive even when the other people were speaking. You were not the main speaker there. You probably had a fraction of the time on that panel, but when you spoke, you were right on it. And then you listened to other people, and you never once picked up a Coke can or anything else that made it less formal than the situation called for. I said, well, that's very heady, and that's nice to know. That's great feedback from people. She goes, it's been a long time since we worked together. Are you available to do something else? I was floored. I said to her, but you said that this was a one-time gig, and I'm quite happy with that. She says, well, it's been long enough. We can do that. Think about that little impact of doing something that's natural and good for you, that resonates with a client that you thought was a one-time client and then becomes a repeat client. That's stunning, especially if you're like me, a consultant doing training, contract work all the time. That's a great tip. So yeah, I keep this on an awful lot as part of my marketing plan. Whoever would have thought a marketing plan for training would be dress up and don't drink Coke when you're on a presentation.
Well, I shave.
Yeah, I think shaving it, I'm not as on it as you were, Victor. I seem to have missed a few spots here.
Yeah, no, I guess like you said, it's all about presentation. Whether you're just doing this in front of a camera or you're presenting to a group of people and it's 5 or 10 or 20, you need to dress like to the occasion, and just keep that in mind. There are times where you can go to the office and wear a cardigan or just a sweater and jeans, and there are other times that you're all business, and you need to, because you're the face of that whatever agency you're representing.
Right. And there was a key phrase in there, dress appropriate to the situation. There are times when going in with a tie and a dress shirt is not appropriate. If you're going in with an audience that's very informal and you're going to get into some difficult issues, they need to trust you. So if your clothing sets you off from everybody else, you want to have that in mind. So it's, again, researching your audience, knowing them before you go in, which now brings us full circle back to the important question that our colleague asked. And sorry, Laura, you're on the spot here because obviously the two of us are men, but you're a woman, you're in a situation and the older men are really being disrespectful for you. What do you do in those situations to either win them over or to diffuse the situation in a way that the learning can take place?
Again, I think it's just recognizing what you're bringing to the table and being authentic about that, being really intentional in the way that you present yourself. Making sure that you're saying like, look, I understand the experience that is in this room. I understand the perspectives that you're bringing to this table. Here's what I have to offer. And if that's something that you can learn from, if that's something that you can take from, that's great. If this just happens to be a networking situation where we can develop a contact and maybe someday down the road, we can be able to help each other in a working environment, that's okay too. But just really acknowledging what you bring to the table and acknowledging what you know they're bringing to the table as well. And letting them take from that interaction what they will. Because you can't force learners to learn. Like if somebody is there and they're not in that mindset where they are able to recognize you and recognize what you're bringing to the table, there's not a whole lot you can do to force that interaction. But I think just really being intentional and authentic in who you are and having confidence in what it is that you have been called on to present and train on. I think that really speaks the loudest.
I'm hearing a couple of themes underlying this whole thing. You are not going to be beaten down, but you're not going to let that person take you down. And the other thing is you're going to keep it positive.
Exactly.
Right? So Victor, let's make it a little easier for you to answer the same basic question here. Say you're in a group of colleagues who are older women and you feel like they're looking down on you because maybe they're reading into you that you are mansplaining to them or you're doing something else that sets them off edge and is focusing the attention on you rather than the subject. What do you do?
I was going to say that I present mostly to women because more, I mean, because of the presentations that I do, the nature of them, I try to put myself at the level of them. As a parent, as a person that already raised a kid, and so they can relate. There's not much you can do. You can't fake what it's not there. So if you bring your experience to the table, they will relate to it. And also, like Laura says, you show up who you are. You show the intent, what you're aiming to do, so they can understand that. Sometimes we do get those skeptical looks, like but you can't really concentrate that all the time because you will have those from time to time. Would you try to teach to them all? Sometimes you do get to accomplish that. Some of the times you only reach out to 90% of the room, and that's okay, because your goal there was to present, to show. As long as you know what you're presenting, as long as you know your topic, you will be okay. The main goal is to you want to be likable, that everybody likes you, but sometimes that is not the case, and that's okay. Just take away the good, and never feel bad about because of that one person, that one interaction that didn't pan out the way you wanted. And in fact, that was kind of that was a conversation I had with one of my coworkers at some point, because like you said, she was young, she was presenting to older audiences, and that's just basically what it is. Just be confident, learn, show what you bring to the table, and people that really want to be there to learn from you, they will do it. They will put all those differences aside and concentrate on what you bring into the table.
There was a follow-up conversation to this with the same colleague that asked us to discuss this today, and that was the idea that we also need to take into account whatever our actions, our body language, our way of presenting contribute to a situation like that. So I would suggest to you that if you've got enough of a trust going in that room with enough people in there, It's not a bad idea if you can control it to a certain extent and facilitate it in a positive way to just confront it directly and say, I'm sensing skepticism here. Talk to me. Just those words saying that you're going to listen, even if you disagree with every word that comes out of the person's mouth, acknowledging that they want to be heard can be an important thing. Can I mention Pat Wagner out of Denver, Denver, as a colleague that I adore for her ability to diffuse confrontation and to teach workshops that are transformative in how to deal with difficult patrons, difficult colleagues, just about any difficult situation you could face. And Pat tells wonderful story after wonderful story about how somebody is in a library setting, somebody is seen as quote unquote a problem patron, and everybody dreads working with that person. And yet somebody finds a way to work around it. And it generally comes down to the person just listening and saying, tell me what's going on. And then saying, I can't change that, but I could do this, or I can't change that, but we might be able to do this. And people that have been problem patrons for years and years and years, just because the person said, here's what I can do and here's what I can't do, they were appreciative. And in one case, if I remember the story right, this is over a decade ago, but my memory of the story was that said, there was a person in a library who did that, listened to the problem patron long enough to say, let me take you to somebody else who might be able to hear this. I can't promise you anything, but let's at least get you to a different level where you can express that and see what comes out of it. And the person who had been seen as a typical problem patron and a perpetual problem patron later wrote to the supervisor and said, this is the first time in all the years I've been coming here that I felt like I was noticed and that I got the respect I wanted as a library patron. How simple, and yet how many of us had overlooked that in that situation, writing off that person, or would have overlooked that situation, writing off that person. So we can take that into our trainings too. If it's helpful to listen without disrupting an entire session and make it part of the learning, especially if you're doing something like presentation skills, somebody says, nah, I just don't think that you're old enough to be able to talk to me about that. Say, well, let's address that. They walk out and you walk out as a better presenter. So I'm going to try to read the formal response I gave her. This kind of summarizes what all of us came to, and then we'll wrap this and move on to the next thing that we want to cover for the day. What I said to her was, at a personal level, my starting point to you is to build off what you said and suggest what I suspect you already know. Always bring your best self to any training, teaching, learning situation you're asked to facilitate. Be aware of the challenges, very much including the one you're pursuing here. Do what you can to make those learners comfortable. For example, identify things you have in common. We talked about that during the very opening of this session. Never, 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 ever let them stop you from doing the best job that you know you can do. I went on a little bit, but that really hits the bottom line there. And I was trying to model for her exactly what we're all talking about, and I'm encouraging her to do. I'm acknowledging, yes, that's difficult. I'm not going to say, oh, it's all in your mind, or, that's an easy one to get over. Don't worry about it. First thing is listen and acknowledge that she brought up a really good, very serious problem that we all face at some level. And the second thing is, not any one of us is going to be able to give the perfect answer to that. So deferring to the group, which was natural to do here today, and say the wisdom of whatever crowd we have is useful. It models for you, again, that whole co-conspirator thing that we're talking about. And I hope will be a foundational element for you as you go forward with your own trainings and you spread that with other people. And then we can all go back to Alec Koros, who's the first person I ever heard use that back at ETMOOC, and say, Alec, 8 years later, we're still spreading the word. The co-conspirator virus is spreading, and we are not going to inoculate. We want to spread this. Final closing remarks on this, anybody? How does that work in terms of preparing you for this Thursday and preparing you long-term for the presentations you're going to do and the learning you're going to facilitate?
I think it all really comes back to the know your audience and acknowledging that this audience that we're presenting to in these, smaller guided sessions, we're all library professionals. We all have, lots of history working in public libraries and, speaking and training. We are all coming into it with that same level of respect for each other. So we won't necessarily have those same obstacles, and it gives us the opportunity to be a little more creative in the way that we design and present our trainings, probably a little more creative than we would be able to be in our in-library staff or in our own organizations as we're presenting. So that gives us a little room to play, a little room to be more creative in the way that we create our presentations and then also facilitate them in those presentations on Thursday.
Great. Victor, anything from you?
No, I think it just helps me more to practice what we're need to do for the next week and like continue to look at that camera. Yeah,
Again,
that's
there are times when you break. I mean, if I looked at the camera for the next hour, I would not know what either of you looked like, and we pass each other on the street and go, "Why didn't you say hello to me?" So you do break away from it. And again, a reality check here. When I read those two comments that I read off the script, rather than just speaking from the heart, did you feel any less engaged because I wasn't looking straight at the camera?
no, no, no,
Uh,
no, no,
whole
no.
trick there is vary it, use it effectively, be
It
aware of
has
it.
to do. It has to do with your experience, with your level, the way you're engaging your co-conspirators per se. Um, Bringing them on board on those conversations. It's not a one-sided conversation. It's just a learning experience, and keeping it that way, making sure that everyone is involved, giving them that opportunity, acknowledging the ones that don't talk, because that's also another important thing. Um, Sometimes you could be on a very informal setting where instead of having those rows of benches or those tables, you like to bring those chairs, those chairs around and make a semicircle. There will still be people that will be not talking. And as soon as you acknowledge them and give them that, at least show them that you know they're there and give them that opportunity to talk so they can express. In a way, you do that here. And I noticed that all the trainers, all the people, different trainers that we train with, they do the same thing. Not everybody talks, but at least they recognize that they're there and try to give them that opportunity. I think that's important.
Yep. Okay, so this is a really great breaking point, not only because it's the top of the hour, but because we've pretty much taken the first half of this to look at what to do with some of those difficult challenges and how to keep them positive and remind ourselves we're all co-conspirators on an equal level here. But also, it gives us a chance for a few minute breather before we come back, circle back for other types of challenges and a little bit more focus on the actual presentation skills, things we can do to up our confidence in ourselves, and maybe even do another practice session if anybody wants to do that before the end of the hour. So let's take about a 5 minute break where we'll stop the recording. You guys are welcome to stay and chat if you want without the recording going, or you can just get up, stretch, go make those phone calls you wish you had made, or get that can of Coke that I'm not going to laugh about, and then we'll start in
Coffee.
5 seconds. So here we
Coffee.
go. Coffee, yes, bring it up for everybody. I'm going to pause the recording now.
All right, I'll go ahead and
Well, those of you that didn't step away, it's been about 5 seconds for you. Those of us that did step away, we've had about 4 cups of coffee. We've talked about the entire Star Wars 9 film series and summarize that in one line. You'll have to catch these show notes later for that. And we're going to start off the second part of our conversation today by preparing for those moments in our final session where we not only watch our colleagues present, but we try to offer constructive, positive feedback to encourage them. A resource I found to kind of guide us through that conversation is this article from a site called Second Nature, the evaluating business presentations. And notice here, this is for evaluating business presentations, a 6-point presenter skills assessment checklist. But I find that it's such a nice, concise article and so adaptable. I want to pull a few of the items out of here to set the tone for us. And I would encourage you to use that URL that you see down at the bottom of the screen. Go back to the article after today's session and look through it at a little more in a little more depth. There are basically 6 elements that they talk about in that article. So I'm just going to read these off to get you grounded in what they're looking for. Excerpts, which are the headings from the 6 things. The first thing is your ability to analyze an audience effectively and tailor the message accordingly. We clearly have been talking about that a lot in the ADDIE model in terms of assessing the need and starting to design and then develop your presentation. And it's always audience centric, it's learner centric. So as we start looking at the presentations our colleagues do, let's ask ourselves, is that geared toward us, or is that geared toward the target audience that the presenter has described to us at the beginning of the presentation? So if you're doing a formal critique of somebody, you want to think, did they hit the audience? Now, in our setting, we're not going to be giving grades, and we're not going to be doing anything of that was great, that was awful, and so you need to do more work. What we're really going to focus on is what did we notice or not notice about how effective it was for the audience and how might the presenter redo that presentation to make it a little more effective. So that will be the thrust that we show on that side. The second of the 6 things when you're critiquing, according to this article and what I totally subscribe to here, is the ability to develop a clear, I'm speaking too quickly, let me say it a little more slowly. The ability to develop a clear, well-structured presentation or pitch that is compelling and persuasive. So we want our training to be compelling. We want it to be persuasive. I think there's something very important and very exciting about thinking of our learning as sort of a pitch. We're pitching to learners who don't have a lot of time the ideas that we think will help them meet their needs. And we need to convince them through whatever activities we use and however we present that this is going to be something to adapt or adopt and use long-term in their setting to take care of a problem they're trying to address. So again, that second thing that we're watching for, both when we design and when we critique other people's presentations, is that ability to connect, to be compelling, to be persuasive. The third is the 6th is the ability to connect and maintain the engagement of the audience. So once you've got them, you want to maintain that. We've talked about a lot of different techniques here. In a 5-minute sample presentation, you're not going to have a chance to try 8 different presentation styles in 5 minutes. So you want to focus on one that you think works for your audience, one that is fun for you to explore here, because remember, this is kind of a learning sandbox. And you don't want to just do something to shine. What you really want to do is something that takes you to the next level of your own training. So don't be afraid to take risk here. Don't stay totally in your comfort zone. Find that wonderful balance of things that make you comfortable and know and let you know that you can do the presentation that you can do in an effective way, but push yourself a little bit to take some risks there. And if the risks don't work out, you'll learn from what didn't work as well as what did. A fourth thing is the ability to prepare effective slides that support and strengthen the clarity of the message. You know, from the slides that I've been using, that I use a variety of different things. Sometimes I try to capture a stunning image that gives us a focal point. And a lot of times when the image comes up, you first look at that and think, what does that image have to do with the words at the top? So you're curious. I'm assuming you're trusting enough to think that I didn't totally mess it up and that there's going to be a connection. But a technique to use there is an image that's just in contrast enough with the topic that maybe the 1 or 2 or 3 word headline that you've got there and intrigues people, but gives people an anchor afterwards to come back to. You know that presentation technique that I've used so many times that I adapted from a colleague is at the end, not a bunch of bullet point summaries, but a series of images that were the most striking images out of the deck to again anchor you in that. And you want to do that with your learners. Something to think about as you do your presentation, as you design your presentation, and something to watch for in our colleagues as they do theirs. The 5th one is the ability to appear confident, natural, and in control. And I love that idea of the ability to appear confident. You know, sometimes you're not going to be confident when you go into a setting, but if you can project a sense of confidence, that lets the learners know that that's okay. Unless the point you're trying to make is, we're all nervous, we're going to do a talk today about stage fright, and I'm nervous too. That would be a point where you don't want to appear too confident because that fights the message that you're trying to give. So think about your message. Think about how confidence, a natural appearance of control, a natural appearance of approach, and a certain level of control of the situation works. But again, we go back to what I said earlier about the solo hiking. You don't want in a group where you're trying to encourage people to be co-conspirators in their learning to feel like there's no solo hiking allowed and that you're the only one in control. When you do that, you sort of take away some of the ability for somebody to learn from the situation by having experienced it. And so as you do your presentation, think about that. And as you critique others, think about the confidence levels they had, how natural it was, and how much or how little control they exerted and whether that was appropriate. And finally, the ability to summarize and close a presentation to achieve the required desired outcome. Remember that the desired outcome is not to show all your slides. It's not to cover all the topic. The real outcome is a transformation that works for the learner and creates something positive back in the work site when they apply that learning to the situation that they're working in. That's a big order, and there's a lot to think about there. And nobody's going to do all this in a 5-minute practice presentation. But the closer you can go to keeping that in mind as you design and deliver, and the closer you can do to critiquing other people's work, by looking at those as touch points to cover when you're offering feedback to people, the better off we're all going to be and the more we will have all learned from shared experience of looking at presentations, critiquing them, taking the best of what's there and learning from the things that weren't so best so we don't do them again. Now, I've said to you many times that there's this whole chunking theory about people only remembering 3 main points from a presentation and maybe 5 or 6 subsidiary points. one big chunk point that I want to point out as we talk about critiquing today is the idea that critiquing comes tied in our minds to the word criticism, which implies something negative. I find that when I'm critiquing people or I'm being critiqued, a good way to start is with something positive. Let us not fall into the trap of thinking that a critique has to focus only on the things that need to be improved. I'd like us, as we go into our presentations on Thursday, to approach the critiques with starting with the thing that was really stunningly wonderful, if there is something stunningly wonderful, or the best thing that happened that you want to call to the attention of the person that was there. That is a great starting point for critique, and it sets the idea that the learner doesn't walk away totally beaten down, only hearing about the problems and not hearing about the solutions. And a secondary thing that is just as important is when we do get into critiques and we start pointing out things that could have worked better for us, let us try to always frame them in terms of, here's something that might make that more positive instead of here's something that really lost me. We do have that inclination to say, here's the moment when I started to get bored, or here's the moment when I really became confused. And in certain settings, that can be helpful to a learner because it helps them to identify what needs improvement. But if that's where we leave them, we've been failures. What we want to get out of this is critiquing somebody to the extent of saying, if you want that even stronger from my point of view, here's what might have engaged me even more. And that gives that person the ability to either take that or leave that. We do not have to accept every bit of criticism that's thrown to us. Sometimes we do things that make learners uncomfortable because the underlying images, by making them uncomfortable, we're opening them up to the ability that there is a problem to be addressed, and then we offer them solutions. So let us, in our critiques, especially if we use the 6-point presenter skills assessment checklist, let's look for the things that need work, and let's not pull back, and let us not offer things that would be useful to people, but let us do it in a way that creates somebody's ability or fosters somebody's ability to 5 minutes from now be better than they were 5 minutes before. Now, Laura, I know you weren't able to be with us live and haven't seen the video yet of the previous session, but there was that wonderful exercise that we sort of stumbled into when two people did presentations. And the first person, who's usually a great speaker in every one of these sessions when we talk, let the idea that it was a formal presentation moment instead of just another chat with the co-conspirators. It held her back at a certain level. And my first question at the end of it was to her and said, to ask her, how did that feel? And she said, well, awful. I was doing this, I did that, and I did that. And I said, so why do you think you did it? And she explained it. And other people offered some guidance of how to get around that. I said, good. Now that we've addressed that, let's fix this. Do that again. And I gave her a couple tips. The tips in this case were look straight at the camera and occasionally look away, but look at the faces so that you're picturing the people you're talking to. And the second thing is stop thinking about it as a formal presentation. This is something from your heart. Tell me the same way you would if we were sitting across the table from each other, what you just said in terms of formal presentation. And when she focused on my picture on her screen and just told me, the presentation was an entirely different thing. So this is something we can all think about as we move into the presentations Thursday. A, yes, you do want to think of it as formal and do the best you can, but B, think that you are presenting to somebody in that room and look at them occasionally and address your conversation to them rather than to that little blue or green or whatever color light it is on your laptop, and keep it conversational and friendly. For those of us that have been together for all 5 live sessions, it's become natural to us. For anybody who's watched all 5 recorded sessions up to this point, you should feel at a certain level that you've been part of this community, even if you haven't been able to do it live. And if you were to do a presentation in session 6, you should feel as if these are people that you know at a certain level and you can talk to them based on their interest and your ability to do that. Either of you have any questions about that quick 6 points that I just summarized?
No questions on my end. Basically, you're referring to the sandwich technique, right? On providing constructive feedback.
Yes.
Okay.
Do you have any trepidation about any of those 6 steps in terms of you being the presenter whose work is about to be critiqued?
No, not really, I guess. In part, it's just because this is a learning environment, and I know that whatever that I will come across definitely will get great feedback, and that's I want to be out of my comfort zone.
Now, if we can carry that out of this learning sandbox and into every training environment you ever inhabit from this moment on, that in itself will have been a magnificent transformation. So those of you watching this from a distance, think about that too. Get yourself into situations where you can do the kind of conversations we've done here. Have these conversations with friends. Get to know your learners. I've read so much that I can no longer cite where I've read different things, but I just know I look for evidence-based research in a lot of what I try to approach. And one of the more fascinating things I came across a few years ago was some research. It was a book length bit of research about how people perceive other people, and it talked to a certain extent about in learning situations, but not uniquely there. And one of the bits of research that came out of that was the idea that the more you see somebody around, whether you're having conversations with them or not, the more you see them around, the more comfortable you get with them. So assuming the research was right, I've always made it a practice to, especially if I'm working in a site for more than one session, to be visible rather than just sit in my office and be out there among the people that are going to be learning with me. I may see them over lunch, I may just see them in a hallway, but be visible as we're doing all our prep so they know who I am. And the minute they walk in, they feel as if there's already been conversation. If you're doing this in online settings, as we've been doing here, you know that routinely Christine and I come on a good half hour ahead of time to do the tech check, and anybody that wants to come in for conversation ahead of time can do that. So you can create kind of the virtual lounge setting in an online setting, and people see you before the learning starts. Again, takes us back to that research that if they're comfortable having informal conversations with us, they're more likely to be comfortable with us in the learning setting itself. And in a small way, that may address the issue that we talked about in the first half of this session of challenges. If these people who are looking on you as being younger or in other ways different from them have a chance to have a cup of coffee or tea or anything else with you ahead of the session and just chat with you at an informal level, that may start to subliminally break down some of those barriers and those biases that they may carry in. And again, to return to that one more time, let us not overlook our own biases when we walk into those spaces, because that can sometimes contribute. And that was something that the learner in this case said to me in a follow-up email. She said, well, maybe I'm doing some stuff too, and I need to work on it. I said, can't answer that because I haven't seen you, but it's something to think about. I am not at the point in my career where I don't think about that anymore. I'm always thinking about what I can do to be engaging with the next group of learners I'm going to work with. And one more tip in terms of train the trainer, not so much in the assessment checklist, but a train the trainer kind of setting. I've certainly done this kind of a series a few times now, and I've been involved in, as a learner, train the trainer series. Every time I go into it, the one thing I ask a new client for is a chance to meet with some of the learners or some sample learners so I can see what the issues are for that work site and vary these presentations in a way that works for them. We never stop doing that. That's what keeps us in the co-conspirator mindset. Any other questions about this checklist? Again, I strongly urge you to look at this before we do the presentations. Those of you watching the archive version, look at this and apply it to your own work. It's really a fabulous bit of stuff. I'm going to go through a few quick slides here. And again, if you're wondering why you're seeing the main slide there and you're seeing the thumbnails off to the left, learned not long ago that as I'm working with learners, especially if I'm going to show them resources, that I can actually use those thumbnails to my advantage. If I want to refer back to something, you can see there are at least 4 slides visible right now. As I move, the top one's probably going to move a little bit. But if I want to refer back to something, the learners themselves can see at least a baby version of the slide while we're not losing sight of the central one. And I checked with Laura to make sure that Zoom was working the way I expected it to work today. We still, at least in the live session, can see each other in thumbnail form down the right. So we've not lost that personal contact and that sense that we're all in a virtual learning space. We actually have 3 things, well, 4 things if I'm really honest going on here. The main thing is we can see each other on our right side of our screen. Secondary, almost important thing is we can clearly see the slide that's the focus of our attention. Third thing is we can see a little bit of where we've been and where we're going. And if you're looking at it and saying, well, I can't read that, but it looks interesting, that's great. It's got like learner preview interest. And the fourth thing is I'm not hiding the fact that there are slide notes down there that keep me going and make sure that I know where I am. And I've got my printout that shows the whole sheet. So it's a complex screen, but as long as we know where our focus is, and the focus is on the learning, this works well. Next few slides, again, it's just basically giving you resources. I'm going to read some of my own notes as soon as the slides come up. Read some of my own notes here because they're much more pithy than if I try to do this off the top of my head. But a few things that I've found really useful over a long period of time in terms of book length resources. This first one, Essential Elements, Prepare, Design, and Teach Your Online Course. It's for any teaching thing that looks at it from a very formal point of view. Here's the 1 paragraph summary I wrote up on this a while back. Bonnie Elbaum, Cynthia McIntyre, and Elise Smith. Elise is, by the way, somebody I knew through a training setting many years ago. And so it was fun to not only see her in action, but then to go back and read a book that she's done. They were all affiliated with the Concord Consortium in Massachusetts at the time the book was published, offer what they consider to be the 17 essential steps of preparing online learning sessions, which keep instructors and learners equally engaged. So you don't have to go through all 17 of them, but if you get your hands on a copy of that book, either from your own library's collection or interlibrary loan, it will build upon a lot of what we've talked about here. And some of what we've talked about will be familiar to you because I've incorporated into it. The book starts with a section on preparing an online course, and it includes tips on how to build a course outline. We've been talking about the importance of sketching things out, set clear deadlines to encourage effective learning, and planning for quality. That's the first part of the book. The middle section of the book moves into elements of designing a course, which helps students maintain their focus, develop effective collaboration. So we've certainly spent a lot of time on that in this series of sessions together, and literally stay on course in the course. And the concluding section on how to teach online is followed by an extensive checklist, which summarizes the contents of the entire book for anyone involved in developing and delivering online learning resources. So I'm not getting royalties on this, but I am doing a hard sell on this because I think in terms of developing learning and delivering learning, thinking about the qualities, especially in online settings, it's a wonderfully designed book that gives you plenty of information, plenty of food for thought. Stepping away from books for a minute, this is a webinar that I saw a good 10 years ago. It actually was from 2008. It's a blog post where this person used to do what was called the Bamboo Project. And I think she's doing a different kind of stuff now. But she has a thing, if you can look at the screen and see the headline on the blog, 9 lessons I learned from running my first webinar. There's nothing revolutionary in here, but it is a great, concise introduction to preparing for online sessions. So if you're still feeling a little uncomfortable, a little on edge about your presentation later this week, go back to Michelle's blog piece, Michelle Martin, and look at those 9 steps as reminders of things to watch for in your presentation. And also it'll help you to critique other people, watching to see if they did things. She talks about the importance in a webinar, especially of having a producer. And, that Christine is here as our backup to make sure that if I'm having tech problems, she can handle that. And if there are things that I need to be seen in the chat window, when I'm smart enough to have it open, I can actually see that. So Michelle's blog piece on her first webinar, those 9 lessons, is, I think, an essential and concise piece of work to look at. Third thing here, I'm going to move the slides on the right down just a little bit so we can see where we're going. This one is by Jennifer Hoffman. And again, you can see half of the notes. I'm almost tempted to have you read the speaker notes, but then you're halfway through it and I have to read them to you anyway. So first, let's talk about the book. Jennifer Hoffman is one of the greats out there. She's with a company called Insync Training. I read the book many years ago, and I've actually been lucky enough to be at conferences where she's presented. She's every bit as great on site as she is online. If memory serves me right, I've actually been in a couple of her seminars. So that tells you what you see down there in the speaker notes, is she's an e-learning consultant. The important things to know about the book is that the introductory chapter includes a valuable and detailed table of features commonly found in live online learning environments, and it's accompanied with illustrations to help readers understand how each feature works. Second chapter, Facilitating in a Synchronous Classroom, is a wonderful primer outlining facilitators' roles and directing learning while helping participants communicate and collaborate online. She reminds presenters and facilitators that our flexibility and our ability to work well in stressful situations are key components to success in online presentations. Talks about the producer, and then the remainder of the book provides suggestions for facilitating effective communication, managing the online learning environment and technology, and conducting online meetings and other live events. There are some appendices that are wonderful in that book too. So if you have all the time in the world over the next several months or years, that's another book that you want high on your list of resources that will help you through and codify some of the things that we've spent so much time talking about. Finally, because you know that I've been talking so much about us building online learning communities, it'd be natural for me to point out Rena Paloff and Keith Pratt's book. I think this is, yeah, I can see at the top, this is the second edition. When I read the book, I actually read the preliminary, the first edition of the book. They are building from work that they began when they were PhD students in 1993, and they're offering online presenters an educator's view of how to create and sustain effective online learning opportunities that lead to communities of learning. Their focus is on teaching and learning rather than on technology. The result is for me at least rewarding and inspirational. The first of the two sections concentrates on the philosophy and the mechanics of developing communities of learning online, and the second section explores hands-on methods for producing those communities. There are a few things in here that I was actually citing pages on. They talk about it, inspiring collaboration, providing learners with clear guidelines. As you've seen all the way through this session, I've tried very much to model what Palov and Pratt talk about. That's on pages 111 through 125. You'll get all this in the speaker notes, so you don't need to be writing all this down. A chapter on transformative learning, pages 129 to 143, makes a strong case for how effective online learning can be by providing learners with time for engagement and reflection. Now, we've never felt a moment of that here, right? We've never felt engaged. We've never had a chance for anybody in this session to ever do anything. Yeah, we'll have to go back and redo the entire series. Sorry, folks. They also remind readers that effective online learning is a learner-centered process. Why? Where have we heard that? I think my influences are showing. Again, a highly recommended book. And finally, from a colleague of mine that I absolutely adore, Jill Hurst-Wall, who recently retired from heading up the library school at Syracuse University, her column Digitization 101, she did a session on, are you now doing video conferencing? And again, she asked a lot of the questions that we've been asking about and has some bullet points in that blog piece that will take you through some of the basics. You've got two long books there, and in terms of just getting ready for Thursday, really, at this point, you should not be taking time to go read entire books. This is the time when you want to sit back, codify the thoughts that you have for your session, get a good night's sleep the night before, do some rehearsals. I would strongly recommend, if you can find somebody in the course you're comfortable with, contacting them and seeing if you can do your own mini Zoom practice to run a couple practice sessions and get feedback at that level, just to get your confidence level up. If there's nobody in the course that you can reach out to, see if you've got a colleague or somebody that you like that knows something about training or knows something about the topic you're approaching, and see if you can do a practice with them, whether it's face-to-face or online. Best thing, of course, is even if you're sitting in the same house and you're doing this with your significant other or somebody else you trust in that same house, get on your computer equipment and have them see it on their computer equipment so that you can get the feel for what it's like to do the presentation as close to the real moment of presentation as can be. What you don't want to do for an online presentation is sit across the dinner table and read your script or just hold up pictures of the slides, say, here it is. Then on the day of, come in and realize, I didn't know how to do that in Zoom and now I'm stuck. So practice with the equipment, practice with the things that you want to play with. Questions about any of those resources? Okay, so let us stop sharing screen because I think that's about all we need of that. And now we're back in full size. My notes from the very beginning where I asked you the things you wanted to talk about. There were just a few themes: the facilitation skills, free-flowing conversation, and transitions, knowing when it's time to move on and knowing how to keep control of that. So let's start with facilitation skills, and let's again keep it learner-centric. Do you have specific questions about facilitating a session that we can deal with very quickly? We'll sort of do a lightning round here rather than turn it into long lectures on any one theme. Here, let me be a good facilitator. Direct question that is open-ended. What most concerns you about your perceptions of what you feel you can't do as a facilitator yet? Let's get those out on the table and address them.
I think for me, in a conversational style learning environment or training, it's making sure that you're effectively managing your time in order to cover all of the different learning objectives that you have. So that's something that makes me very nervous when approaching something from a conversational perspective, as opposed to a rote lecture training.
So self-learning here. What do you already know from this course that will help you in your presentation on Thursday and further presentations to keep that under control and not lose control of it?
Yeah, I think blocking things out, we had talked about, making sure you have those divisions. You always try right around 10 o'clock, halfway through our training, to give us a break. But for the few minutes before that, to have a little wrap-up conversation, have a Q&A session where we can clarify any points that we need. So dividing up your training that way.
Let's get playful here for a minute, like we haven't been playful all the way through the series. If we were on site and I was noticing people were uncomfortable in their chairs, what's one thing we could do to actually re-engage people and get them out of the discomfort of having been in the same chair for an hour and a half? What would we do? Nothing fancy here. You're looking around the room. People are like this and they're kind of hunched in their chairs. What could you do to get them out of their chairs? What would you say?
something I've done in different sessions, you do like a scavenger hunt, and it's
Okay.
like an icebreaker. So you give them a list of 3 or 4 different objects that they need to find in their immediate environs. And then you kind of, again, engage them by having a share out, like, what did you find that was fluffy in your office? Or what did you find that is something from nature? And again, that's something that you can refer back to later in the session if you find out a unique niche interest that somebody has, or find out a similarity. So it gets people up and moving and also sharing a little bit more about themselves to create a better bonding experience.
So the basic thing is we want to get people up and out of their chairs. In a virtual setting, do we ever think about getting people up and out of their chairs during a session?
Not necessarily. It's not the
Why
first.
not?
I know.
So improv, and again, I've alluded to this, we haven't done a lot with improv, but always, improv to me is the most important thing, where you get something, you go, how can we use that right now? Laura, I can clearly see you're in a place that has some books, unless you're using a background. That is your real background, right?
That is.
Victor, are you in a place where you have access to 2 or 3 or 4 books?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm clearly in my study and I have 2 or 3 or 4 books. So here's an improv, getting people out of their chairs, also known as get their butts out of the chairs. In the next 60 seconds, each of us is going to get out of our chair and go pull 3 or 4 books off our shelf. Don't overthink this. Just grab something that's meaningful to you with the idea that when you come back, you're going to talk about one of the 3 or 4, but we're going to have options. So you have 60 seconds to get your butt out of the chair, go grab a couple books and come right back. Go. And people watching the archive version, do the same thing.
They're all children's books.
Oh, this is going to be so much fun. Total disclosure. I knew you were in a children's room because we were discussing that. I know she's going to have some fun books. They're not going to be boring like mine.
Monsters.
So clearly, while we're waiting for Victor to come back, you want to be looking at those and decide which of the 4
Yeah,
or 3
I know.
that you talk about. So Obi-Wan is back, and again, I want to acknowledge that Obi-Wan is with us today. You didn't hear this, but during the break, when I came back and saw that you changed your name, I said to Laura, I was just trying during a couple of minutes I had to see if I could locate an image of Obi-Wan and change my screensaver to that to see what it would have done when he came back, but couldn't pull it off, didn't have time.
No,
All right, go ahead. You started to say something.
That, get a little bit, like you said, be playful.
Yeah. We had Captain America last time. We got Obi-Wan today. Who knows who's going to be presenting on Thursday? I can hardly wait. Which of you would like to go first? Your challenge is you got about 1 minute. Look at the camera, do an impromptu presentation, and just tell us about the book in your hand, why you chose it, and what we might learn from it, if anything.
Okay. I guess I can do that.
Great.
But unless Laura wants to do it first. Laura.
Go right ahead.
Okay. Well, granted that this is not my room. So basically the books that I picked up, there are some that I'm somehow familiar with. And I picked them up just because, like for instance, on this one, this is a book that I get a lot of kids over in Juvenile Hall requesting it. And I guess I have to be able to show it more on camera, right?
Good practice, absolutely good practice. I could see it ahead of time, but when you held it up that way, even better. So there's a tip to us. If we're going to use books in our presentation on Thursday, you want to make sure that the viewers can see them. Good job, Victor.
Yeah.
Obi-Wan.
So these books represent, I guess, from my perspective, I haven't had the chance to read it, but all these kids looking into it, getting familiar with it, and I asked them the reason why they were so interested in it. It's because somehow some of them relate to it, and it has everyday situations that I don't know. I guess they feel familiar, and it's because it's all being talked to. That some other people have talked to them about this, and they're very interested in this book. We have 3 copies of it. This is a nice copy. However, the copies that we have at Juvenile Hall are like a little worn down. And you can see on the checkouts, we got like 60, 70 checkouts each one, just because it's a heavily used book.
Victor, give me a one-line wrap. What's our takeaway here?
To show you that somehow you will come into that not everything that kids read at Juvenile Hall is what you will expect them.
Great. Laura, feedback from Victor.
It's great. You showed the cover very clearly and made sure that it was in frame. And you talked about you didn't just talk about the book itself, you talked about what the book meant for your library, how it's one of the more popular titles, how the copies that you have on the shelves are well loved, and how many copies you have and how many times it was checked out. So you took the book and then turned it into a conversation about your library and what it means to the patrons who have read it and checked it out. So that was really nice to be able to not just like, this is the title I picked, this is what it's about, this is the author. You made it a story about the library and what that book means for the patrons of the library. So that was really engaging.
What was your takeaway from what he did, Laura?
I think it's a lot about representational objects. It's not just a book on the shelf in the library, it's a story that means something to the community. So as a presenter, you can put up, like you do, engaging, stimulating photographs that, you know, like we're obviously not talking about campfires in your background in this training, but we're, you know, having that same sort of gathering, having that same sort of story sharing. So you can use representational objects or discussion points to be able to really hammer home different points that you want to get through in your training.
2 things in reaction to what you just said. One, when you talked about the effect it had on the community, Victor, one of the most stunning moments for me, and it was just a silly kind of almost throwaway line, but it was stunning in the impact it had, was when you said, this is a nice copy of this, but the ones that are out there being used, they're kind of beat up, and some copies have been used 60 or 70 times. That got my attention. It's like 60 or 70 people have looked at that. I don't know what your circulation area is, but if you've got people, that many people looking at it, maybe I will look at this too. And that was a great moment of engagement. Laura, something you just did that was interesting to me was I've deliberately used that same image for my background and on each of the slide decks to remind us that what we're talking about is storytelling and engagement all the way through. There have been many times when I've thought maybe the image is getting tired and hackneyed and it's time to switch it out, but I just wanted to have some kind of consistency. And the fact that you referred back to it as an element that has been consistent from the beginning reminds us, trust your instinct when you're putting something out and stay with it if it makes sense, because your learners will get it even if they're not acknowledging it. You know, to circle back to that in session 5 and actually draw attention to it is a nice reminder to all of us of what that means. Victor, how'd it feel for you to do that particular presentation?
A little bit different than the last time.
Because?
I was more conscious about looking at the camera now and trying to bring the book forward, just so you guys could see it. It would allow me, I guess, in a way, trying to draw attention to the book rather than to myself, so you guys can know what I'm talking about. I didn't know whether or not you were familiar with the book, but I wanted to make sure that you would be able to see it. And talked about the book, because the main focus is the book, not the person, but the book, right? And the topic that I'm talking about is the book. It felt different than the last time I did it. That's why I said, okay, well, I'll do it first, because I felt more at ease, a bit more prepared about that.
When you came to session 1, if on day 1 I said, okay, everybody, we're going to do impromptu presentations, 1 minute each, what would your reaction have been on day 1?
I go last.
Laura, what would you have done if on day 1 I said, okay, we're going to start this off with presentations?
Pretty high anxiety person, so that would have been very anxiety inducing for me.
a reminder to us, let's carry that sense of how we feel into our trainings, and let's have empathy for our own learners. There were some things I was thinking about in the early planning stages of this series that would have involved even having you set the agenda on the first day. There are great people out there. I've read a couple of them in Priya Parker's book that I mentioned a couple of times, The Art of Gathering. She talks about these people where on the first day of a semester-long class in leadership, a professor at one of the big Ivy League colleges always walks into the room and just sits there, and for the first 5 minutes says nothing. And the leadership learners in that course are looking at each other for the first minute like, is he going to start? What's going on? What do we do? And he will sit there while there's this feeling of eternal discomfort as the learners are trying to figure out what to do. And after 5 minutes, which feels like a half hour to them, he finally says, welcome to the leadership class. And by the way, what we just did is a demonstration of what it feels like when there's no leadership in the room. I mean, it's a stunning thing, but it really makes people feel uncomfortable. And Christine and I had heard from our sample learners, oh, please don't do that to our group. It will just set off an entirely different tenor for the whole series that you don't want to get into. So we clearly held the agenda thing until session 4 when we developed trust. But you need to know going in where the comfort level of your learners is. And that professor obviously thought he didn't care if they were uncomfortable in that situation because it was part of what he was doing. So nice demo, Victor. Nice feedback from yourself about what you're getting out of it. A nice way of tying it back in. All right, take a deep breath. Don't just plunge into it. Think about what you're doing. Get comfortable and tell us about your book.
All right. Well, considering the events of the last week, I wanted to bring in one of my favorite lesser known titles from Eric Carle, who just passed last week. So this book is called The Honeybee and the Robber, and it was one prior to children's librarianship or prior to becoming a children's librarian that I didn't even know he had written because it's been out of publication for a really long time. But it's also the first Eric Carle book I've seen that is a pop-up book. So I thought it just took the artwork that he had and elevated it so much more. So you can see the big spreads. And whenever I mention that we're going to be doing an Eric Carle story time with the families that I work with, they always assume that it's going to be the very grouchy ladybug, or it's going to be the very hungry caterpillar, or it might even be the very quiet cricket. But this is one that a lot of people haven't seen before. So it's a surprise when you open it up and they're able to interact and pull the tabs and open the flaps and really see what's going on. But what's great about this book as well is that it has educational tidbits that are hidden throughout it. So it talks about the structure of the hive. It talks about how bees defend their home. It talks about how they communicate to each other by dancing to show where different locations of food sources are. So it really sneaks in those little educational moments that usually come from nonfiction books, but in a very fictional, very engaging story. So you have your honeybee on the cover and you have your robber on the back. So one of my favorite stories to share for bug story times or for bee story times, and just a really great surprise and another wonderful written and visual ode to an excellent author, Eric Carle.
Nicely done. Victor, Obi-Wan, your response.
No, well, thank you for showing that book because definitely that's a book that I've never heard of. Like you said, everyone is familiar with the very hungry caterpillar and some of the other books that he wrote. Then that's quite interesting. I like that because I'm actually going to go look for a copy at the library.
I know, I want to do that too. So how effective was that training?
Yeah, I mean, I like the way she presented the book. She presented, to show it to the screen. At the beginning, I noticed that there was a relative light. But you were quick to notice that, and we're shifting the book in a way that it will not be, people will not see that and concentrate more to draw attention into the image. That's great because that teaches you that, like you said, sometimes you will not, like you, Paul, said, sometimes you will not be on the best lighting environment. You won't have the best lighting environment, but if you're quickly to adapt, you can bring that, move away from that situation in a very subtle way. Definitely the educational tips were great. Thank you, Lara, because I like that, and I will definitely probably be using that book when I go out and about because it's hard sometimes to try to find good books that will provide you with those big type of information that you need to present. And that will be another resource. I like that also the fact that you mentioned that this is a book that you've actually read before that you like, because it shows the level of comfort that you have with speaking about it. Not just talking about the author, but talking about the book itself. Um, Definitely, your mechanics. Well, you're a champion. I think we actually come across, I think, at one time before, right? And one time before, and when I saw Laura, like, wow, you're a champion. I've seen you in story time in the Hanging to Be website, but you're paid. So yeah, no, it's kudos to that, because definitely takes like you said, you're shy about your delivery. You're shy, like, but you're very comfortable. I noticed it on those videos, because they've actually helped me to be a better presenter online, because it was like, wow, this can be done. Because when I was told, hey, you need to be able to be the other bilingual storyteller, because we only have one. And she was a backup, like, okay, where do I go? So I started looking at resources online, and I stumbled upon a website, and I started looking at, like, okay, I can do this, I can do this. So it gave me the confidence. So you definitely, like you said, you have this anxiety. It doesn't reflect in any way. You're very confident in your public speaking. And again, going back to the book, amazing book. I want to go ahead and read it, and I'll keep it. And if we don't have a copy, I'll order a copy, and I'll keep it on my own personal stack of books that I use for a start time. Thank you.
How'd it feel, Laura?
It felt good. I noticed as soon as I was done presenting, though, I focused so much on making sure that the book is in the screen that I pay attention to myself on the screen rather than looking directly into the camera and making that eye contact. And it's
Rest
something that I do
assured.
in story time too.
Rest assured, not a problem. It was totally engaging. You came across as looking at us as much as you were looking at the book.
Okay.
And it raised a question for me, which is a positive question here. Did you sense any difference at a really important level between doing that if you were on site with people as opposed to online with the two of us today?
So you're talking about if we were gathered in person.
I mean, let's not talk about the fact
Sure.
that, of course, you had to look at the little light, but overall, your comfort level of talking to us, did it make a difference that you were online as opposed to on site?
It does make a slight difference to me just because I can control the online environment a little more easily than the in-person environment, especially when you're talking about like presenting to families. Storytime in person, there's so many more classroom management considerations that have to be put into place. So you can't necessarily hit all of those different lesson objectives or learning objectives that you have because you have to manage people. But in the online environment, it's a little easier to have that level of control and to really be able to fine tune the way that things come across on the screen.
That sort of flies in the face of people who say online can never be as engaging or as effective as on site, which of course, is ridiculous. The best of on site and online work equally well, but it depends on how you do it. My observation there, and maybe I'm reading too much into this, correct me if I'm wrong, I felt like I would have gotten pretty much the same presentation from you if I was sitting across the table from you as I'm getting sitting across the state from you. Accurate or not accurate?
Probably, yeah, pretty accurate. I mean, I do a lot more movement when I like to walk around when I'm doing presentations slowly, obviously, not like rocking back and forth. But yeah, I think it would be pretty much, the delivery would be probably the same.
And yes, you were very animated there. It was another thing I meant to comment on. I just didn't take enough notes there to say, you were lovely and animated in that. Your hands were moving at just the right time. You were interacting with the book in a way that made sense. Just really nice presentation, both of you. On our first go of this last week, there was a need to go back and redo stuff to give it a second time to improve. I'm personally not sensing that need here. Am I accurate in that perception with the two of you that you feel like doing it a second time is not going to give you major difference like it did last week?
Not really. The only thing I will do is just look more at the camera.
Good.
But
Same for me.
yeah.
That's not to say you don't want to keep going and practicing your presentations as you get closer to the real one on Thursday. But for the purposes of what we've been doing today, what a lovely thing. And then to take this full circle back to what kicked this whole thing off, I was asking you, what can we do online, or is there a reason why we can't get out of our seats? And the answer was clearly no. What did it do for the two of you when I asked that question, said, okay, we're going to get out of our seats? What was your first thought?
Okay.
Move around a little, yeah.
See, you're a great audience. You're a perfect audience. Like, okay, we're going to go for it. A lot of people probably would have at that point thought, how are we going to get out of our seats? We're all on camera. And that would have stunned them because they can't think outside the box of literally, I have to stay in this box or there's a problem. At one point, for the people at home watching this in an archived version, there is one frozen picture where Christine has herself on mute and just has her screen showing the way it is. And the three of us were gone. It's like people at home are going, what just happened to the show? But it was clear because there was an introduction that the show hadn't disappeared. The show was just going outside the box in a very literal way. And it was a great exercise for us all to think about how we can do those moments. What I started in the back of my pea brain mind in that session where I was going to say, let's try getting out of our seats, was something I saw a presenter do a few months ago at a virtual conference where about 3/4 of the way through a very long session, she said, everybody get up and stretch. It's like, what? And it was okay. We got up and so you could see ties or you could see shirts or you could see bellies or people that were really conscious of it just moved their camera back so their faces stayed visible. But everybody got out of their seats. And it was a moment of revelation for most of us to say, you can't do that live. Why not do that live? And it was just one little step for us to take that even further. Rather than just say, let's all get out of our seats and let's stretch our arms and have some fun here. I was thinking, we have something in common. We all like books. We like talking about books. We're all in places where I know we have access to books. So we can go grab our books, come back on and do a demonstration that takes us live and has fun with it. That's the spirit I want to inspire in you and your learners. Think what you think is impossible and ask, can I do this? And if so, try it. Now we're almost at the top of the hour. In fact, we are at the top of the hour, so I'm not going to bother doing what you've just done so effectively. But I would tell you, if I were to do one of the books I pulled off the shelf, there would have to be a first step. I'm aware of the fact that if I hold the book up and I've got this Zoom background here, the book's not going to be visible. So step one would be I just take off the background so that wouldn't be a problem. Step two is I would do what I saw Laura doing, make sure the light is not shining right off the book title so you can't see it. And I would tell you about the book. And then there would be that moment of saying, oh, by the way, one of the reasons I like this book is because I've got 4 short pieces in it. And that would have been the punchline. I said, well, that's the personal level. That really takes it personal. And if you at all like what I do, then you would be inclined to say, well, I want to see what he wrote there. If you don't like what I would do, then my question would be, how come you stayed with me for 5 sessions, folks? There are much nicer people out there than me. That brings us back full circle. Any final questions as you prepare for Thursday, or anything that you want to acknowledge as having been particularly useful to you that you're going to build on and use in the next couple of days from today's session? That's 2 questions. First one, any questions?
No.
Questions so far.
Anything you're going to build off for Thursday based on what we did today?
I just have to reiterate, like, using that conversational style of learning. It's something that is very new to me in a trainer setting. So it's something that I definitely want to continue exploring and pursuing as I'm creating trainings in my organization and as we're looking at the Thursday presentations.
Fantastic. And then this is kind of a subtle thing of one of the things you wanted on the agenda was knowing how to chunk things and decide what's important. Did that exercise of talking about a book you like for 1 or 2 minutes give you some more insight into how you chunk down to its essence?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, using that object or using those images in order to kind of create that focal point, and then using the transition of the object or image to kind of chunk things even more distinctly, I think is a good way to think about it as well.
Great. So Victor, anything that you're going to walk away with that you can use over the next couple of days and long term in terms of presentations?
No, basically just concentrate more on my delivery style, and whether it's having a backup plan, definitely that's a one time. Another thing that I would like to think about more, especially online, like if I'm not able to present that, but have the book and I can talk about because it's something I'm familiar with, just in the case of the slides doesn't happen to work the way I want them to.
Yes. Never let the slideshow drive your presentation. There's takeaway number 3 from today. I can't remember what the first 2 were. I'll have to go back and review the video. But never let the slide deck control the show. The show is you and your interaction with the learners. And on that note, I say thank you very much. Hope the people watching this in an archive version are enjoying it and learning from it. And we'll all be back together for our final session in a couple of days, unless you're watching the archive version where you can just pretend 2 days have passed and jump right into it. Have a great afternoon, everybody.
But